There's been a lot of talk lately in South Carolina about the redistricting and how it is absolutely repugnant for people in power to get to choose who their voters are. I want you to think about that. We're in power and we're going to draw congressional lines and we're going to redistrict and we're going to do all these different things so that we can make sure that we can divide up the votes based on census data, based on polling data, and make sure that we can maintain power. This is literally the people in charge deciding who gets to vote for them and then chopping up the state in a way that makes sure that they maintain their grip on power. I'm glad that this was defeated. I'm glad we didn't redistrict, and I hope this thing ends up on the ash pile of history and we don't try and do this again in our state. Moving on, I'd like to talk about Bill H3557. More repugnant to me than people in power choosing who they can vote for, who their voters are, getting to pick and choose who the voters are, essentially, is deciding who you get to pick from when you show up at the ballot box. What does freedom to decide? What is the freedom to show up and vote? What does that right mean if the people in power get to choose who you get to vote for? Now, the Republicans and Democrats both have their own system of doing primaries, agree with it, disagree with it. The way they run their operations is perfectly fine. That's those two political parties, and I don't want to play inside baseball on the way that they run their organizations. I think that we all remember what happened to Ron Paul. I think we all remember what happened to Bernie Sanders, and I think that the primary process, at least at the presidential level, is pretty disgusting. I think we all just saw what happened to Thomas Massie in Kentucky, and if you're a Republican, whether you supported Massie or not, you look at this and you go, well, this is disgusting. The Republicans are clearly doing everything they can to make sure that we're choosing who the Republicans want us to choose, because we're going to put this Republican up in this district. We know we'll win no matter who we trot out there. So we're going to take somebody who is principled or stands up to the party and doesn't go along and doesn't march in lockstep with us, and we're going to push them off the ballot. I disagree with that strongly. I think it was disgusting what happened in Kentucky. I think it was disgusting what happened to Bernie Sanders, even though I would disagree with him on virtually everything. But Bill H3557 does something worse here in South Carolina. What Bill H3557 does is put a massive financial burden on people who don't participate in the primary process by forcing them to pay for the primaries. What does this mean to you as a voter in South Carolina? Well, what it means is that citizens, regular folks like myself, I'm running for U.S. House in District 3 here in South Carolina. Regular people like myself, like Casey Whitener, who is trying to run for U.S. Senate and unseat the embarrassment that is Lindsey Graham, and give real representation to conservatives who believe in a small government, who understand that we're overtaxed, overregulated, that the majority of our economic problems that we're facing are due to massive deficit spending, creating an affordability crisis. People who are speaking outside of this, people who are resisting the two political parties in this country who just want to grow government. Though they want to grow it in different ways, their message is more taxes, more government, more intervention into your lives. And there are people like us libertarian types who are trying to push back against that. What Bill H3557 does is makes it so that regular citizens, regular people with regular jobs, not rich people, not well-connected people, not people who have spent their entire lives pursuing political power, people who want to give you, the voters of South Carolina, an option outside of this two-party system. What that does is it forces us off the ballot. Because your average citizen doesn't have $10,000 to just throw at a campaign to get on the ballot. We are from a nation that was born with the idea of a citizen legislator. That people amongst the community would go off and they would represent their communities in Washington, D.C., and then they would come back and rejoin the economy in which they helped to shape. Now, we all know that in Washington, D.C., the people who are making the decisions about shaping our economy and how these things work, they're not faced with the reality of their decisions after the fact. These people get lifelong pensions, they get lifelong health care plans. They don't have to deal with the consequences of their actions, even if they weren't getting sweet speaking engagement deals at $200,000 an appearance, even if they weren't getting hired by lobbying firms and defense contractors, even if there wasn't this revolving door of special interests in Washington, D.C., making sure that if you vote my way, we'll take care of you after you're done serving. We already know that these people aren't serving their communities back home. We know that. What's happened in South Carolina is essentially saying we're going to not only attempt to choose who our voters are, but when you show up, we're also going to make sure that we throw as many roadblocks in the way of independent-minded candidates who don't belong to this two-party system so that the voters don't have any other choice. And it's really, to me, it's even more egregious in a deep red state like South Carolina, where the Republicans already have supermajorities in both houses. They're already going to win the governorship. What is the interest? What is the goal in making sure that people like the Green Party, the Libertarians, the Constitutionalists, what is the goal of keeping these people off the ballot? To me, it's relatively simple. They don't want to have to answer to people outside of that system. They don't want to answer tough questions. I've ran a couple of other campaigns when I was in the Libertarian Party in Wisconsin, and I can tell you that a quote-unquote small government Republican doesn't want to sit next to a Libertarian and have to answer questions about how they have grown and voted for an ever-expanding state that limits your liberty and limits your freedom. They don't want that. And so by passing this bill, this H3557, what they're doing is they're saying we're going to reduce the number of options you have. We're going to try and control who the voters are and limit the amount of choices those voters have when they actually show up to cast their ballot. It is one of the most disgusting examples of circling the wagons as people get more and more disgusted with the two-party system that we currently have, to make sure that we keep you in these two lanes, this red team, blue team road, where you have to choose one of these two lanes, and there is no other option for you. People are fed up. People are tired. People are looking at their preferred party and saying, you are not representing me anymore. And I think the two parties are feeling that pressure. And what they're doing is doing everything they can to make sure that you don't have an option. Now, this won't take effect until the 2028 primary, so there's time to turn this thing around. There's time to reach out to your representatives and tell them that this needs to be changed, that this bill needs to be amended, and that this requirement for people who do not participate in the primary system and nominate their candidates by convention are excluded from this, so that you at the very least, have that choice when you show up to vote. I hope you'll take a look in the comments section, reach out to your representative, and ask them why they supported this bill. Find out how they voted. Ask them why they supported this bill, and find out what it's going to take to put together some community action to get this thing amended and reversed so that when you show up in 2028, you're still going to have options.